Brett, first and foremost, thank you very much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to be here and to share some thoughts with us. And maybe the best place to start is with your son. Congratulations.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah, as you know, I pinned the same wings on him 2 weeks ago that my grandfather pinned on me 34 years ago when I graduated from pilot training. And my wife was in the Air Force for 20 years, I was in for 33 years, and now my son's off to fly the F-16, and so continuing that Air Force legacy in the family is pretty special to us.
Well, I forget if it was on LinkedIn or where it was, but I saw the picture and it's just like, those moments are just so special. And maybe the best place to, kind of jump into this would be interested in hearing about your grandfather and your legacy and just kind of how you got into, the Air Force and just sort of an overview of your career, because obviously it's pretty incredible. Maybe just walk us through that if you can.
Absolutely. And my grandfather never flew in the Air Force. He bought an airplane right at the end of World War II. Back then, like you could buy Jeeps wrapped in Cosmoline, he bought a Piper Cub. And so he flew that airplane for quite a while. And then, I don't know, someplace as I was growing up, I decided at first I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I said, I don't really want to be a lawyer. I think I want to be a pilot. And so I still haven't been able to identify the guidance counselor that said, well, you ought to apply for an Air Force scholarship and you ought to apply to go to Duke. And I did both of those, and I ended up at Duke with an Air Force scholarship and met my wife at Duke. We both commissioned right after graduation. My wife, Mary Ann, served 20 years. She retired as a lieutenant colonel, and then I spent 33 years in the Air Force.
I'll be darned.
So most of that time, 28 years, I was an F-15 pilot. I worked my way up through the various levels of command, and in my final command I had the privilege of commanding our largest combat wing in Okinawa, Japan, the 18th Wing at an airbase called Kadena, which was an interesting job. About 9,000 people in the wing doing all the things you have to do to run a wing. At the same time, we had essentially a town of 25,000 on the base, so I was the mayor, the chief of police. We were surrounded by 3 towns that really didn't want us in Okinawa, so a lot of political dimensions to that. So, but a really terrific job. We loved being in Japan, and getting to know the Japanese was great.
Wow.
Then one day I get a call that says it's time for you to leave Kadena, and you're going to go join the IT, comm, and communications, command and control, and cyber world. And so I spent the last 5 years of my career working in primarily cybersecurity and helping to form what is essentially the operating construct and the force structure and the budget that United States Cyber Command is now pursuing to defend our nation in cyberspace.
Wow, and you were eminently qualified for that position.
Oh, absolutely. I had a 1981 computer science degree from Duke that you could do the whole thing on your wristwatch now, but it was a great leadership experience, going from being a wing commander, being an operational commander, doing all of those sorts of things. Had a lot of opportunity to do a variety of combat missions in Southwest Asia, and now I'm with a group of folks who are looking at me going, why are you our new leader? You've got wings on. Can't one of our own people good enough?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of started my leadership experience, and with moving from something that I was very comfortable and very familiar with into something that was a completely new, if you will, set of operations and set of tasks and those sorts of things. But what I very quickly figured out, and something that I've carried with me, is that leadership is technology agnostic. And the things that made you a good leader that got me to that point in my career, I didn't need to change because I was now working in a completely different line of business, if you will. And so over the last 7 or 8 years, as I've had the chance to do some speaking, and now almost 3 years in the private sector, I see all of that as exactly the same.
Well, I tell you, we'll come back to that a number of times, I'm sure, but do you remember the first thought you had in your career about leadership? Like what it was, who you identified with as being a leader? Maybe it was formal training, maybe it was just sort of some informal recollection, but the first time you were like, wow.
That's a leader.
Yeah.
I spoke at my son's pilot training graduation. I told this story. I said, remember, there's certain things that are kind of seared in your memory as you go through your life. And I remember it was at Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona. I had gone through all my training. I'd gotten to my first operational squadron, and now we were off on our first training deployment because we were assigned in Florida, and now we were in Phoenix, Arizona, flying a combat training mission. And it was one of those very clear mornings just after sunrise, and I'm taking off on the wing of our squadron commander, a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Joe Gorecki, Gork, Vietnam fighter pilot, all those sorts of things. And we're taking off, and I can still remember that, how excited I was to be flying with the squadron commander. And he was the type of commander that everybody in the squadron wanted to fly with. And I assumed that was the norm. And what I found out as I went through my career is that there's no bad commanders. There's nobody that comes in thinking, I'm going to do whatever I can to make life miserable for the people in my squadron today. But commanders that really inspire you, that motivate you, commanders that you want to be on their wing, I've got some of those things that we've talked about. They've got that legitimate leadership aspect, but they also have that expertise that you want to learn from. And I think the term is referential, that when you kind of roll all of that together, and after our conversation earlier when we talked about that, I really started thinking about that. Cliches are cliches because they're true, but the kind of people that, you'll fly through the gates of hell and do whatever they say needs to be done.
Yeah.
And so what I encourage those new lieutenants to do is that when they see that commander that's like that, is pay attention. Pay attention to what they do. Why is it that you're inspired by them? Why is it that you want to fly on their wing? Why is it that you want to be around them and learn from them? And I think that's really sticks in my mind as the first leader who has said, okay, I want to be like that. And there were several things I took away from that as I went through my career.
It's interesting you're mentioning some of those terms. I know we've chatted about them casually, but a lot of people think of leadership in the context of power. And our founder, Dr. Hersey, kind of defined leadership as an attempt to influence and power as influence potential. And there's really these three main subsets to power, and one is legitimacy. Right. It's like you're the commander, you're in charge, And the others are more on the personal power side of things. It's like, do I respect, you might be in charge, but do I respect your level of expertise? And again, we'll get back to your cyber command, because while in the context of your service to the country, your ability to fly an F-15, might have distinguished you, when all of a sudden you're, kind of get a lateral promotion, if you will, and you're in charge of cybersecurity. Right. Why this guy? So the whole idea of expertise, and then the other kind of the T word thing, the whole trust aspect, the referent power thing. Right. Do I want to be like this person or aspire to be something like them? Those are kind of three key components to things. I think the other thing you mentioned that's really important is most people in leadership positions, they don't set out to screw things up, right? They don't send out to like, kind of disturb engagement or these other things. They have the best of intents. But what common mistakes from your career, did you see people in positions of leadership making that really were correctable mistakes? So things, they were promoted into a position of legitimacy, let's say, and their command or their tenure didn't go as well as it could have because they did what?
I think there's a couple of trends. I think that it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true, is that people get to a certain position, like they send you to a class when you first get promoted to general, and one of the first things they tell you is that, hey Sam, congratulations, you're now a general. You are no better looking and no funnier than you were before, okay? So just remember that. So I think as people, particularly as they get more senior and they get into these legitimate positions of power, that they think that is sufficient. And that is not sufficient. You still have to prove your value to the organization. You still have to earn the trust of your subordinates. And particularly as you get more senior, you have to understand that, I saw this in the wing I commanded. I was a one-star general. I had 5 subordinate colonels that worked for me. Now they all had to do what I said, but how they did that and how they pursued those goals was going to be based a lot on the relationship I could develop with them, the trust that we could have. And so while there is kind of that hierarchical leadership, I think you're really effective if, one of the terms I've heard is called peer leadership, if you will, where we're working side by side to try to get to the same goal. And you saw that very much if you work in the Pentagon. You know, in the Pentagon, I was a 2-star general working over here. I had no direct influence over these other 3 or 4 2 or 3-star generals, no legitimate power, if you will, over them. But I absolutely had to be able to work with them and convince them and persuade them that we had common objectives, common goals, and those sorts of things. So I think one aspect of it is certainly realizing that legitimate power is not sufficient. I think a couple of other ones that stick out frequently to me is I usually phrase it as, what I said is not nearly as important as what you heard. And so the ability to really fight for feedback, right? Particularly when you get to a large organization. You know, some studies say that really you can only directly influence 6, 7, or 8 subordinates, right? In fact, I got this question. I had the opportunity, we were talking earlier about, I was out at Duke's Fuqua School of Business a couple of weeks ago talking leadership. One of the questions was, you can only influence 7 or 8 people. How do you run an organization of 9,000 people? And I said, well, a lot of it's about communication, and a lot of it is realizing that what you said is not as important as what they heard. And so you really have to work to get down in those layers of the organization and walk around and spot check and say, hey, how are things going? You know, you don't go ask them, hey, did you hear what I said last week in our, you know, our commander's call? What you have to do is talk to them about their job, talk to them about how things are going, talk to them about, do you feel comfortable that you have the resources you need, all of those sorts of things, and you'll start to get that feedback. Is my message getting out? Am I setting the organizational culture that I want in the organization? But you can't trust that just because you said it, that people necessarily believe it. And so communicating and then being able to demonstrate when you do hear something that says, you know, that is not what I intended and not what I wanted, making sure that you make a change, and it's a change that people see that, hey, the boss listens and the boss actually changes. And I think the third one, and this kind of lines up with some of the things Marshall Goldsmith has in his books, is the way I phrase it is never discount the possibility that somebody else has a good idea, right? And so when you're sitting at the head of the table, you know, and you've got 6 or 7 or 8 of your senior folks around there, and nobody's asking any questions, nobody's giving you any pushback, everybody's just kind of nodding north and south.
Yeah.
Something's probably not quite right with the environment that you have set. And so it's really important, I think. So I think those 3 things is legitimate power, is particularly in the military, that's where you start with, but it is not sufficient. There's plenty of people that have had legitimate power positions and have not been successful. And I think that communication and building that trust, and then I think listening, right? That other people have good ideas. And you know, one of the things I think about is, you know, if we've got an objective that I want you to get to, if I tell you, Sam, here's what I want you to do. We're going to this objective. I want you to do A, I want you to do B, I want you to do C, I want you to do D. And that's not really how you see getting to the objective. And so what I want to do is I want to hear how you want to get to the objective. And maybe you want to do X, Y, and Z to get to the objective. Maybe I think, you know, if I did A, B, and C, and D myself, I would probably get us there, but this is Sam's job.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be better off by letting Sam take the road he wants to go. Because if he tries to do it my way, he doesn't own it. He's probably not going to do it quite as well, and we may get an 80% solution.
Yeah.
Or if I let Sam do it his way, as long as it's clear that he has my vision, he understands the objective, he understands where I want to go, he's got the competency, right? He's got my support, and we'll probably get a 95% solution at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the things that stand out to me.
Yeah, so many things to follow up on there. I hope they don't come out jumbled, but the first thing, and one of the most recent things you mentioned, is you know, kind of like Marshall's work, and I think, you know, both his books, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, and also Triggers, are 2 of the best I've ever read. But the whole premise of What Got You Here Won't Get You There is just that.
Yep.
You know, there's so many people in leadership positions within organizations that sort of get to a certain level and they figure out, or they think the reason they got there is because they were the straw that stirred the drink. And to get from here to an executive capacity, it's really about engaging others, and, you know, you agree on the what, but the how becomes much more, you know, less dictated by your own personal experience and more dictated by, you know, by their engagement. The other thing you were talking about with the Duke students that were questioning you, you can really only impact 7 or 8 people. I mean, I flash on a program that we have. It's been successful, with us at the Center for Leadership Studies for literally decades. That Dr. Hersey used to use, personally, was 12 O'Clock High, which I'm got to be familiar with, right?
Right.
You were playing the role of Gregory Peck in real life. But the whole idea when he took over the 918th Bomb Group, he recognized that his message to the group was one thing, and that was really pretty structured. But his message with Jesse Bishop, who was one of the informal leaders of that 918th Bomb Group, that was something different. And that if he could convince Bishop to sort of see his vision, Bishop would take care of it, with people that he didn't have direct access to. And that whole idea of leadership as kind of a game of chess versus checkers, I think really distinguishes people that might be really strong, first level supervisors, versus dealing through 2 or 3 layers to get something done.
Yeah. Just as I've read more and more about situational leadership, by the way, when I first met you and I told my wife, Mary Ann, I said, so I met the guy, he's married to the daughter of Dr. Hersey. I said, situational leadership. She goes, yeah, I remember that. She said, because, in the military, at about the 3 or 4 year point, you go to something called Squadron Officer School, because it's the first formal leadership training you have, and situational leadership was one of the things we were talking about the other day. Oh, she goes, oh yeah, it's directing, it's coaching. I mean, this is stuck very clearly in her mind, and I won't say exactly how many years it was since she was a captain, but it's been a couple of decades. And so I was going to mention that to you, that that immediately came to her mind. But as you think about the different situations and all of those sorts of things that go into the model, back to your point, loyalty is the one that I think is key to dealing with that situation that you highlighted from 12 O'Clock High. Because one of the things I think about is, I call it the beg forgiveness, don't ask permission. If I could sum up everything I think about leadership, it's in beg forgiveness, don't ask permission. I want you to feel like that, look, you've got a lane in the road. The more senior you are, the fuzzier the sides of the lane are. Here's the objectives, go figure out how to get there. And I think that's how most people want to work. Now, if you're in my office begging forgiveness 3 times a week, then maybe you need to ask permission a little bit more often. But I told those students that I had applied that from the first organization I commanded, about 350 people, all the way up through those, and then the big executive staff positions if I had. And I never got burned. But what has to make it work is kind of from the 12 O'Clock High example, there's a loyalty piece to this, and it's a 2-way loyalty piece. And one part of it is, if I'm going to empower you to do what needs to be done, operate in your lane, make decisions, do things, if you do make a decision that I don't agree with, unless it's unethical, immoral, or illegal, then I'm going to do everything I can not to change that decision, because I want everybody that works for you to see that Sam, hey, he's got delegated authority from the boss. He makes decisions, he gets things done, and then we talk about it. So the next time the situation comes up, or a similar situation, that we're going to have a discussion about it. But the other side of that is your loyalty to me, and I have to set an environment that makes it work in the way I'm about to describe, where I don't expect you, especially when we're talking senior leaders. I don't expect you to just blindly go out and do what I want to do. Back to our earlier thing, if I'm not getting pushback and discussion in the right environment, then something's not right. But once we've all said, okay, the discussion's been had, this is the direction we're going, then I need you to go out and execute against that direction. And I've seen times in my career, and at first I corrected it too late, and later on I figured you can't let this fester. If I've got any kind of sense that what you're doing is walking out of the office and going, the boss has got another stupid idea, but here we go. Right? I also don't expect you to walk out the office and go, hey, the boss has a brilliant idea, because your folks will know. But you can go out of the office going, here's what we're doing, team, here's where we're going, here's our objectives, here's how we're doing it, here's why we're doing it. But for you to be able to do that, I've got to create an environment where we can have a discussion and we can get to the point where you feel free to ask, okay, well, why are we doing that? I don't understand that, and we'll have enough of a discussion where you can see my logic. You don't necessarily agree with maybe this objective at this time, but you see enough of the logic where you can go, this is not the way I do it, But again, going back, Marshall's got so many good things, is
Yeah.
who's the decision maker, right?
Yeah.
And so if I'm a smart decision maker, I'm going to get all of these inputs, we're going to have all of this discussion in the right room, and then once the decision's made, we're going to execute. And then you've got to decide, okay, it wasn't my decision, but I understand why we're doing it, and I can support this, and I will support it, and I'll go on and do it. But you can't agonize over the fact that you're not the decision maker.